Welcome to Magalia Rose Studio. My name is Kathy, and this video is somewhat of an introduction to Yupo. If you aren't familiar with this material, it is a fun surface for watercolor, although it isn't a paper, and it's made from polypropylene plastic, which makes it resist the watercolor. As you can imagine, it runs and moves in ways that you can't always predict, but are always fun. So if you're hoping to loosen up your style, Yupo is a wonderful vehicle by which you can do that. Now, the first thing I want to do is show you a few samples of different paintings and types of paintings done on Yupo. Now that you've seen a few samples of what can be done with Yupo, I hope you're excited about trying this new material. I usually begin with an 11 by 14 size sheet of Yupo, which is available in pads at a reasonable cost. If not at your local art supply store, online you can obtain it. I'm next going to talk about some of the supplies that I usually use when I am working with Yupo. Here are some supplies that I use when I'm working with Yupo, and a few hints that I'll offer, and hopefully if you haven't heard of them, you'll give it a try when you do work with Yupo. The first thing is I like to work with a limited palette in this particular instance, and I've used sap green, two types. One is Dick Blick sap green, which is a more muted sap, and then M. Graham sap green, which is comparable to many others and is a little more bright. I also use deep sap green, which is, I believe, only made by Daniel Smith. And then in addition, new gamboge and burnt sienna. I like to have two water containers, and I add just a couple of drops of a liquid dish detergent to each one. One is my bottle to mix with my colors, and the other's to clean my brushes. And I have them both with a little bit of that dish soap in there. It makes the water a hair more viscous, which allows it to spread more easily on the Yupo. And again, not very much. Put a few drops in and stir it with the handle of your brush. There shouldn't be a foam or anything. Then I'm going to be, on the end, after I've painted the bamboo, I'm going to be doing negative painting in the background. And in this case, I'm going to use the Dr. P.H. Martin Black Star India ink. And I use old brushes to apply this. They can be cleaned with warm water and dish soap. And the funny thing is about the India ink is it will be permanent once it is applied to the Yupo. The watercolor, until you fix it, will be able to be reactivated with moisture. The ink is permanent, and I want you to remember that. As far as my watercolor brush, my favorite is a number 2 quill brush. They are very flexible, they're smooth, so they don't leave brush texture on the Yupo. And as you'll see as we progress, they have some very interesting uses when you can adjust the tip on them. I never handle my Yupo with my bare hands. Initially, I will use the white cotton gloves you see there to handle it and to put it down on a support board. And you don't have to tape it, just lay it on your support board. When I am actually painting, I like to have a piece of paper or a paper towel, or if you use tissues for anything such as lifting, please use non-lotion tissues, facial tissues. My painting, you can see I already have the painting ready with the drawing, and I've simply used a number 2 graphite pencil. I make it fairly dark so that I can always keep track of where I am, even when there is a darker wash applied. So now we have our supplies about ready. Let's get to painting. If you haven't used Yupo before, you need to be prepared for a few strange habits of the watercolor on the Yupo. Yupo resists the water, so you're basically not going to get any absorption going on. And the colors will blend in very unique and sometimes surprising ways. What I'm going to do is, the only way to show this to you is to go ahead and do a little painting on here. And I'm going to continue with this area here of green bamboo, and the basic first color down I'm going to put is some new gamboge. And you'll notice I'm also having some paper. I don't want to touch the Yupo with my hand. I may have some oils that will affect how the paint goes on. So here I am going to put in a little bit of the new gamboge in the center. I'm going to rinse off clean my brush, and now I'm going to come in with some sap green, and I'm going to just gently throw it along here, grab a little bit more, and put it in here. Now you can see how strangely that water and paint mix in there together. I'm going to rinse my brush off again, dry it off a little bit, and I'm going to get a little bit of the Daniel Smith Deep Sap, and I'm going to just come along the edges. I'm going to be attempting to give sort of a look of roundness to this, but again, we're dealing with Yupo. Nothing here is going to happen as you probably will plan it. Now I'm going to go ahead and pull this up into that area. The one up here is totally dry. Be careful working near something that's wet, because if the minute it touches it, it's going to bleed into it. So we're going to go ahead and do this. Now I've got sort of a nice little outline here. I'm going to rinse my brush again. Going to dry it off pretty well. This is a nice little quill brush, and I'm going to make it into sort of a point. And now I'm going to just sort of pull some of this color up, getting it to blend just a little bit. I'm going to make a little more darkness there. I'm going to pull this over here just a little bit. I'm going to get a little more of the dark sap green and put under that line. I'm going to let that just bleed. Clean my brush, dry it, and this time I'm going to dry it pretty well, and I'm going to gently pull it over here to sort of make a definitive point there. Now time to step back and sort of look, and for fun I'm going to take a little burnt sienna and just push it in a little spot there. Rinse my brush, dry it pretty well. I'm not even going to make it into a point, it already has, and I'm going to pull that burnt sienna up and in. Now the fun thing too is if you want to make an area dry, use a clean, dry brush and just gently pull it across, and then you can wiggle if you want, and it will continue to move. So I'm going to do that again down here a little bit. And at this point, if I wanted this a little lighter, I'm going to clean my brush and just gently pull it up, and it will be lighter and the colors will blend in. So there is a demonstration of how the Yupo accepts watercolor. A fun aspect of Yupo is that when you're using watercolors, you can actually lift out areas you don't like and proceed to change them. And all you need to do is a nice brush and clear water, and just gently rub it all into the dried painted area and sort of wiggle it so that the paint is reactivated. I'm just going to do this upper section here. And I'm going to have a Kleenex. I prefer Kleenex to paper towel because paper towels sometimes have a texture. And I'm just going to zip it around here. And here you can see you're ready to change that color if you didn't care for it, which I'm not real wild about these colors. So I may be doing a lot of lifting of this brown and going back to the green, which I think is just much more fun. So anyway, great aspect. You can change mistakes very quickly with Yupo. Well, now you've had the chance to see how easy it is to lift mistakes out, so this gives you a lot of freedom for experimentation. Now I'm going to give you a quick example of the fact that you can add texture to the Yupo while the paint is wet and also while the paint is dry. I'm going to start by simply getting some of that new gamboge, and I'm going to put it on that upper area of that stem, and now here I'm going to come into the secondary area. Clean my brush off. I'm going to come in now with some sap green. And now lastly, a little bit of the Daniel Smith Deep Sap, and that's going to be along the edges here. always remembering that I can lift out areas that go over lines. Gives me a lot of freedom there. And then, as we did before, a little bit of burnt sienna here and there. I'm not going to be pulling up any colors right now. I'm going to let those sit for just a moment as they are. And then I'm going to dampen a natural sponge, wring it out until it's just barely damp. And now I'm going to just press it into that wet paint and get some texture. It's going to start flowing back into those areas, so I'm going to keep my sponge handy. But on this lower segment, I'm just going to use a paper towel. I'm going to crunch it up in my hand, and then again the same procedure while the paint is wet, putting it into that. Now you can at this point go ahead and add some more color if you'd like. Here I'm going to throw in a little more deep sap. And that one looks pretty much fine. Now at this point you can do a little of that pulling technique. I make sure my brush is pretty dry. Make it into that nice thin point. And then I'm just going to come in like that. Pull it in. See what happens. So there you can see the effect of texture. And the fun thing is also you can do this texturing on the dry areas of the paint. You can just, again, you dip in, maybe a little more moisture on that sponge, put it in, wiggle it, and it'll definitely pull out some color. So experiment, have some fun with doing texture with Yupo. There's lots of options. Now I'm going to move on to painting the leaves. I'm going to paint the leaves in this area. And this is a process in which I will put some paint on, but I'm going to then let it dry. And with Yupo, don't use a hair dryer to dry. It'll simply move your paint all over the place. Just let it sit and dry on its own. It sometimes does take half hour, an hour, sometimes even more depending on how thick your pigment is. But let's go ahead and get started so we'll at least have a beginning on those leaves. I'm going to start with a little bit of the new gamboge, and I'm going to sort of imagine somewhat of a sun side hitting the leaves. And remember, even if it goes out, we can clean that up once it's dry. I'm going to clean my brush and come in with some sap green. Now the sap green I have been using over in these areas is the Dick Blick sap green. It's very muted. I'm going to use a regular M. Graham sap green, which is much brighter, and I'm going to just put that in here and wiggle it about a bit. I'm not worrying about the stems right now. I'm going to be doing those later on down the line when it's the main leaf sections have dried. I'm using a different green just simply to mix things up a little bit, make it a little more interesting. Now, true to form, I'm going to clean off my brush, just get a dab of the Daniel Smith deep sap and just sort of put it in at a few spots. A little bit of definition fun going on here. I'm going to put it clear here to bring a little bit of a differentiation between the underleaf and the overleaf. And now I'm going to go back to my old friend for accent. I'm going to go back to the burnt sienna and just put it in at a few places. What's going to happen after this dries, in a few hours I'm going to come back in And I'm going to reactivate a lot of these colors and blend them, and to then use the texture on them. So that's about all I'm going to do for now. I'm going to go ahead, step aside, and let these dry. Once dry, I'll return. Okay, the leaves are completely dry at this point. And I'm going to just play with mixing some of the colors that are already there. I'm going to dampen my brush a bit and then just come in and reactivate the paint. And you can see that happens relatively quickly. And you can sort of get a glaze effect if you want. And add a little other color in there. And now I'm going to go ahead and use my sponge that's been moistened and wrung out till it's almost dry. And I'm going to texture this leaf that I have just painted. And I'm just going to let it sit there like that for a bit. I'm going to go to the next leaf, make sure I have a clean brush, and do about the same thing. And comfortable with the fact that if something happens that I'm not comfortable with, I can easily lift it out. Again, my little sponge. And just going to continue. And again, if I go over certain lines, you know, I can clean that up at any time I desire. I'm going to be addressing that stem in just a moment as I progress with this. I'm kind of intrigued with this light area here, but I want to just bring a little green in there. I'm happy with that. Now get to that final leaf. And I'm going to clean off my brush and get a little bit of the new gamboge. And I'm going to put it in there. Okay. Now my stem, I'm going to go ahead and use the Dick Blick sap green. As I told you, it's a very more muted sap than you'll often find. And I'm just going to follow those stems down, pull a little bit of the leaf color into the stem if there's something near there to blend it in. And now with, I'm going to go ahead and get my brush pretty dry, put it into that famous little slice. I'm going to get the deep sap and I'm going to run that on the underside of some of the stem, just here and there. It doesn't have to be a straight line. And pretty much, other than, what's a little texture here? And how about a little texture up here? Yeah, okay. So now you have a good view of how the leaves are handled, and in a moment I'm going to be back with probably a speed up of some of the stalks just to reaffirm how I handle those. I have all of the stalks of bamboo and leaves painted out at this point, and they are completely dry. And I always suggest at this point to get what I call a working mat. This is an old mat that you've cut into L's. I usually have a light colored white one and a darker or black one, depending on the picture, the painting I'm working with. And this enables you to sort of focus on what you've done and not the surrounding areas and colors, and just look at it and evaluate what you might want to be doing in the next step. Now, for example, I'm going to be doing some blending in some of these, and I want to bring in some more of that new gamboge color that you're seeing peeking through these. It's not peeking, a lot of it's gotten lifted when we did the texturing, so I'm going to try to pull in some more of that. As far as anything else, I'm going to be finishing the stems up here. So I'm going to go ahead and work on those for a little bit, and I will give you a quick demo on how I will reactivate some of that paint to change and get in that new gamboge. Okay, now I have my section here I'm going to be working with as my demonstration right in this area here. And I've reactivated all my colors actually, in case I wanted to put some in there, so I'm going to do that. I have a number 2 quill brush. Again, I really enjoy these brushes because they hold so much water. They're very soft, so the Yupo doesn't take on the texture that I don't want, perhaps from a stiffer brush. So the first thing I'm going to do is just take some clear water with my brush, and I'm going to bring it into this central area and reactivate that paint. And you can see it reactivating, blurring a little bit. I also have some nice Kleenex available if I need those for additional lifting. So now I'm going to rinse off my brush completely, and I dried it off so it's just damp, and I'm going to pick up some of that color in there. I'm going to do that also over here with this one that's been activated. And now I'm going to put in some of the new gamboge. Just sort of dropping it in there and letting it blend a little bit. Clean off my brush, leave it just damp, and sort of mix it in, pulling those reactivated colors into that area. Now if I look back over at some other areas, such as over here, I have a little bit of the burnt sienna, so I'm just going to go ahead and put in a little burnt sienna and a little tiny bit of the sap green. The burnt sienna mutes that green a little bit. And now if you still feel it's a little too dark, you're not sure what you want, you can just lightly pull some of this down. And up here I'm going to start working a little bit while this one's thinking, and instead of using that heavy paper towel, I'm going to just go ahead and use my little sponge to lightly get a little tiny bit of texture, nothing quite as dramatic as it was before. Again, here I'm going to reactivate, pull some of the greens in, but keep a little lighter there in the center. A little of the darker sap green there, and a little tiny bit of texture there. Okay. Now I've simply dipped my brush into the deep sap, and I'm pulling some lines down in there, some of our little texture cracks on both of these. Okay. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and let that dry. Well, one little thing here. This little area is bothering me right there. Okay, so now I'm going to let those dry and then see if I'm not a little happier with having more of the yellow showing through there. Okay, I was pretty happy with those two that I redid, so I redid the entire stalk, every segment of this particular one. I'm going to go ahead, I'm happy with the one over here, I'm pretty happy with this. I would like to redo a little bit of this bottom one here and this, again to pull out the gamboge that I see above. And this one needs to have pretty much the same treatment. So I'm going to go ahead with that, and I will be back with you in just a few. I have gone ahead and made the changes, bringing a lot more of the gamboge in so that they're somewhat similar. And I could play with this for literally ever and be making changes and adjustments. That's one of the fun things about Yupo. But as we've always found out with watercolor, knowing when to stop is a tough one. And sometimes you just have to say, right now, this is where it is. Now remember, after I do this background that I'm going to show you, I can still change the watercolor areas. So I'm going to remove my little temporary working mats. And you could do a background, you could just leave this white. That's nothing wrong with that. You could also do a background with watercolor. It won't be real smooth, but it could have a lot of fun texture, blue or whatever you felt would be fun. But what I'm going to show you is something that I don't see too often with people working with Yupo, and it can be very effective. And that is, I'm going to use the India ink. This is the Doc P.H. Martin's Black Star India ink. And all I'm going to do is the backgrounds, and that's not going to be too difficult. And notice I'm still protecting the Yupo from my arm, my hand, my oils. And I'm just going to bring this in and bring it right to the edge. I use a brush, an older brush usually. India ink can be very effective in a lot of uses. Try to follow my pencil lines. Another reason it's nice to have them dark. And now you can see why I wasn't stressing too much when my watercolor went over the lines into the background areas. Going to make a switch to a little smaller round. So I can get into those tight spots. And you can see how easily it just flows onto the Yupo. That smooth surface just makes everything move so smoothly and easily. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and continue with the rest of this, and I will return. Well, here we are. We finished the entire background. I'm pretty happy. As I've said before, you can continue working for almost forever with Yupo because you can erase or lift and recolor, but I'm going to call this one done. When you are dealing with watercolor on Yupo, I really strongly suggest that when you are done, that you use a spray fixative. This will help protect it in case any moisture does get on there. And there are several out there. This one in particular is a Blair Matte. It's spray clear, and it is designed for tempera and also for watercolors as well as drawings and other things such as that. So when you're done, go ahead and give it a good spray, let it dry completely, And then let's go ahead and do a quick frame job and see how this is going to look framed. Well, here we go. I've sprayed my spray fixative over the entire painting, let it dry thoroughly, and I have mounted it into a mat and a frame. I do my own framing because over the years I found out that many of my paintings don't fit the standard mat sizes and I need to cut them myself. And once you cut your mat yourself, you want to pick the frame that you want for your particular artwork. So we're done. I hope you've enjoyed this adventure with Yupo. I hope you give it a try on some other things. And welcome again to Magalia Rose. And if I hear from you on our website, magaliarose.com, we do have a contact page if you have any questions. Again, thank you and keep painting.